Hi guys, in this short video I'm going to be going through the B6 practice test that you did, and it will give you a chance to improve your exam skills. So let's take a look at question number 1. So question number 1 involved a chef who was chopping some carrots and cut herself with a knife. She withdrew her hand quickly and shouted. The next day the chef noticed she couldn't move one of her fingers. She visited the hospital and was told that she'd cut a nerve in her hand. The operation was done to reconnect the nerve. She had an injection in her hand to stop the pain of the operation. And the task that we're doing is here, so we're completing the following sentences by choosing the correct words from the list. So this is picking these out of these 8 words, which one goes best into the sentences. So let's talk our way through it. So the chef felt pain when the knife cut her hand because it stimulated something in her skin. What did it stimulate? It stimulated a receptor in her skin. So the receptors in the skin are what detects something happening to your body. Next part, she moved her hand using her arm muscle. Muscles are something. Muscles in this case are the effectors. So they have an effect on your body. They affect what your body does. The quick withdrawal of her hand is an example of a something action. The action that we're looking for is the reflex action, and we've looked at lots of examples of different reflex actions in humans and other animals. The chef could not move her finger because the knife had cut something. Now, she couldn't move her finger. That can only mean one thing, that she's cut one of the motor neurons. So anything to do with movement is controlled by motor neurons. The painkilling injection affects junctions called something between her neurons, and the junctions between the neurons are called the synapses. So any time we talk about junctions between neurons, joints between neurons, where neurons are connected together, they're called the synapses. So that was part 1, where we were just filling in the gaps with those words. So this key skill that you needed to have there is, do you know your vocabulary about this topic? Question number 2. It was all about a Spanish homework that had been set, and the students were being told to learn 20 Spanish words and get the English translation for them. And there was 2 different ways that the students were tested. One, where they were given 20 words in English and they had to translate them. And then another test where they were given 20 words in English, 20 words in Spanish, and they had to join a line to connect the 2. And let's see what we're being asked. So we are being asked to calculate the mean number of words remembered by Group A. So calculate the mean number of words remembered by Group A and by Group B. Write your answer in the space below. So Group A has already been done for you. So let's take a look at what we should have got. Got an example of a student's work here. So let's just take a look at this. And this sort of thing. In this example of a student's work, what they've done down the side of their question paper is they've just shown their work in. So they've shown their work in, added up all the individual marks, and then they've got their total there, and then they've taken the total, divided it by the number, in this case 10, and here they've got the right answer of 15.2, and as we can see, I've given them a mark there. So no problems whatsoever with showing your work in on the margin or somewhere on your question paper. Absolutely no problem with that whatsoever. So really, really good piece of work there. Next part of this question, we needed to suggest why there is a difference in the mean scores between the 2 groups. So in other words, why did we get different results? So that's what the skill that we were being tested on there. And we were looking for, so there's 2 marks available, and we were looking for a couple of the following marks. So let's just quickly go through what marks we could have had or what answers we could have given. So one part of the answer is that the pairing activity, so pairing got easier as you went along. So that's one reason that the results might have been better for the pairing one. If you're pairing things, then if you paired like the first 10 from the ones that you can remember, then you've got, the task becomes a little bit easier because you've already completed part of it. So if you're pairing things, then that activity gets a little bit easier. Furthermore, So that was what we get for, so that was our first mark. Our second mark was available by explaining the words were written down for I think it's group B, isn't it? So words are written down. So if the words are written down, then you're more likely to link one of the words from when you were revising those words. So we needed to say that the pairing activity got easier and the words were written down, which makes it easier to recall information. And I'm just going to put info for short. Recall information. So that was part B. Part C, it says participants should be informed about experiments before they take part and explain why. And what we were looking for there is we need an answer that is something along the lines of any sort of ethical reason. So some examples of some answers that we had were people talking about the rights of the people. It's someone's right to know that they're being experimented on. Other examples where people have the right to know what the experiment's about and how the data is actually going to be used. Some people would want to know whether they agree with it or not, so they would want to know what the experiment's about so that they could choose whether they agree with it, for example. People need to know before they take part so that they're aware of the risks. So putting people at risk when they're not aware of it is unethical. We could talk about a religious point of view. So some religions might forbid particular practices, and the experiment might involve that practice. So people might want to know from their religious point of view, and also so people are aware of any potential harm. So we need to talk about some sort of ethical discussion about why people should be informed about the experiments. Part 3 was about an fMRI scan. So fMRI means, I'm not sure what the F means, but the MRI means magnetic resonance imaging, and it's a way to scan people's brains. And we're told that someone was doing different tasks, speaking, listening to speech, and writing, and different parts of the brain, as we can see, are active during these different activities. And our question is, different parts of the brain have different function. Describe the evidence in the scan which shows this. Well, I think the evidence is pretty clear. When they were speaking, this part of the brain was active. When they were listening, this part of the brain is active. And look, with the speaking part, it's not active. So when they're doing different skills, their different parts of the brain were being used. So the answer that we were looking for there is something along the lines of different parts of the brains are active during different tasks. So different parts of the brain are active during different tasks. So different tasks use different parts of the brain. And next question we had is we need to suggest why 3 areas of the brain were active during writing and what we needed to say for this. So there's what we needed to say was that that listening to speaking is associated with language. Okay, so listening is we also needed to mention that speech is associated with language as well. So speech is associated with language. And the last point we needed to make is that writing is associated with language, but writing involves thinking about speaking and thinking about listening. So we needed to also say that writing is associated with speech. So to get the marks here, we needed to make the link between speaking and listening being to do with language and writing being to do with language. And there's an extra bonus mark if we can talk about what this part of the brain might have been used for. And you've got to think about, well, what else do you have to do when you're writing that you don't have to do when you're speaking and listening? So think about what that part of the brain might have been used for while this person was writing. Right. This next question is all about a child and how they learn how to do something. So a child shouldn't be able to write for the first time. They usually cannot do it straight away. Suggest what a child should do to learn to write and describe the changes that take place in the brain as the child learns. So there's more than one bit that we need to include for this. So we need to do this first bit. Suggest what the child should do to learn to read and write, and describe the changes that take place in the brain. A lot of us manage to note that to learn how to write or learn how to do anything is all about practice. Okay, so they should practice what they do, or if we mention something about repeating a task, practice or repeating a task, anything to do with repetition or doing something more than once, that's answering the part about suggesting how the child should learn to write. To get our second mark, though, we needed to talk about the changes that take place in the brain, and the sort of point that we needed to make there is that the more we practice, it strengthens pathways between neurons in the brain. So it strengthens pathways in the brain. Strengthens pathways. So the more you repeat something, the more those synapses learn what you're supposed to be doing, or what that connection does, and then the more you use it, the stronger that connection is. So that when you do it again, it's a strong pathway, and then you can do it without thinking. This next question is, before a child learns to write, they must first begin how to use language. Which part of the brain is most important in learning language? So this was more a skill to see whether you know your vocabulary. So the word that we were looking for is, or the term that we were looking for, is the part of the brain that's responsible for learning language. It's called the cerebral cortex. And the cerebral cortex is the part of the brain responsible for intelligence, language, and memory. So cerebral cortex is like a really important part of our brain, and it's the part that relates to intelligence, language, and memory. So last question that we've got, it's a 6-mark question. And our task that we need to do is all about Pavlov's dog. And Pavlov trained his dog to salivate. So the word salivate, it just means produce saliva, okay? Or your mouth producing saliva. And the reason that you salivate is so that it prepares your mouth for eating food. So trained his dog to salivate when hearing a bell ringing. Okay, really, really famous example of conditioning. Explain how the dog developed this conditioned reflex. Now, to go through this question, I'm going to show you a few examples of some work that some students have done. So let's take a look at our first example, and before we look at it, let's bring in the mark scheme. So key points that we were looking for were that the dog salivates when food comes, and as I explained, the dog salivates to prepare its body ready to digest the food, because there's really important enzymes in our saliva that help digest our food. And in this case, the food is the primary stimulus. Food is given when a secondary stimulus is given. So in this case, the secondary stimulus is the bell. This is repeated many times, and as we know from repetition, it strengthens those pathways in our brains so that the dog starts to associate the bell with food. Salivation for food is a reflex, and the dog begins to salivate when he hears the bell, even though there's no food. And then this is called a conditioned reflex. So that's the points that we were looking for in our mark scheme. So I'm going to show you 3 examples that each got different numbers of marks. So in this case, we're going to look at the first one, and then this one was worth 2 marks, because another key thing that we need to look here at is the quality of written communication will be assessed in this question. So you've got to make sure that your work is of a real high standard. So let's read our way through this one. So dog developed this conditioned reflex because they know what to do in order to receive the reward. So thus, they will know what to do to get the reward because their brain remembers the sequence. Now, in this case, if we get our marks team back in, it doesn't mention anything about a reward. The dog wasn't taught to do this as a reward, so it was not a particularly great answer because it doesn't address these steps. Written communication's fine, so from that point of view, it's a good answer, but it hasn't got the scientific points that I was looking for. So from that point of view, low in the fact that it's got not many scientific points, but it has been nicely written, so I've given it 2 marks. Let's take a look at our next piece. So this one is an example where we managed to get 4 marks. So let's take a look at this one. The dogs developed this conditioned reflex because when they heard the bell ringing, the dog might think it was time for food. This is because the dog had learned and kept it in its brain that every time the bell rings, it's time for food. This helped the dog to develop a new thing, so they might be able to understand it and also understand the communication we are having. So let's bring our mark scheme in. So I think that they've mentioned the idea that the bell was involved and that it was repeated many times. And then the dog started to associate the bell with food. So from that point of view, it's got a few points. But it's got a few of the points that we were looking for. However, it has got a few problems with it, which is why it didn't get those full 6 marks. So let's take a look. One of the problems that it had is this sentence here. So this helps the dog to develop a new thing. Now, to me, that doesn't add anything to the answer. Not particularly scientific, not particularly grammatically correct. So this part that I've put in the red brackets here, I haven't credited for because it doesn't add to the answer. We've also got a mistake here with the at the start of the sentence. So this looks like it's a lowercase t when it should be a capital T. I'm following that full stop there. So written communication there isn't of the highest quality. However, it has got a few of the relevant points there. Let's have a look at our final example. So dogs develop this conditioned reflex in many ways. One way was their brain. With Pavlov's dog, he taught that every time the bell rang, he would get food. However, when it happened again, there was no food, but the dog still salivated. The reason for this was that because the dog's brain had remembered that every time the bell would ring, food would be there. As a result of this, dog developed this conditioned reflex by a stimulant. Now let's take a look at this one. I think this has got quite a few of the points that we were looking for in our mark scheme. So it mentions about the dog salivating. It talks about the food causing it. It mentions about the bell. It says that the repeating it and then the dog starts to associate the bell, the dog gets used to it. And we have summarized it by using this idea of the conditioned reflex. However, I didn't give it that full 6 marks because we had a few grammatical errors here. So this student has managed to muddle up the words there. So here, one way was their brain. Now it's talking about there as in the thing bit that belongs to something. So it should be spelt like it is in red here. And here, they talked about when the bell rung, food would be there. Now here, we're talking about there as a place, so it needs to be here, this there, which is written in red. So that's the reason that this one didn't get those 6 marks, because there was a couple of mistakes with the grammar there, or I guess the spelling. So we just spelt there wrong. Another example of the like spelling is this word here. So we're talking about develop this conditioned reflex by a stimulant. Now, we've just used the word stimulant in the wrong way. So in this situation, a stimulant is an example of like a drug that makes you more alert or more aware. So it's something that makes your body more active. We're not talking about a stimulant. We're talking about a stimulus, something that causes a reaction to the body. Okay, so think something that causes something to happen is called the stimulus. So this student has muddled up the words a little bit there. So that's the reason that I didn't give it all those full marks. If you need one last look at the this one, then I'll leave the mark scheme there for you. And if you need to go over this video again, then please do.